Wonder Woman 1984 released 5 years ago, and it is one of the worst comic book movies of all time. This movie is not only an embarrassment to the DC brand, but frankly disrespectful to the Wonder Woman character. I want to do something a bit different with this video. You see, I can sit here and talk about why this movie is so bad. That would not be very hard to do, plus there are dozens of videos that were made 5 years ago discussing the same thing. What I want to do is not just focus on how bad the movie is, but how disrespectful it is, and how stories like these have continued to be made over the past 5 years. So let's discuss the troubling failure of Wonder Woman 1984. If you're like me and you spend a lot of time streaming movies or watching videos online, having a browser that keeps everything smooth and easy makes a huge difference. Thankfully, you can use Opera, who are the kind sponsors of today's video. Opera makes streaming easier and enjoyable for everyone. It even comes with a free built-in ad blocker and a free VPN for extra privacy, which keeps everything running clean and smooth. It also has features like Lucid Mode to subtly enhance video quality when needed. Sometimes if I'm watching a movie or a video and I want to take notes, I can split screen my browser so I have everything right in front of me. No need to switch between windows anymore. Now, if you don't want to split your screen, that's fine. You can simply pop out the video you're watching and move it beyond the browser. This is great for me when I want to watch a recap video while also taking notes. My favorite part of Opera, however, is how customizable it is. You can alter the entire theme of your browser, including animated backgrounds, UI colors, browser sounds, and more. Dark mode is also extra dark, which makes streaming easier on the eyes. Play with endless combinations to create your dream browser. So if you want a browser that is fast, powerful, and customizable, then check out Opera using the link in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you so much to Opera for sponsoring this video. Now, it's not surprising that Wonder Woman 1984 is another film that's in the long line of franchise stories that many consider to be failures. Franchise storytelling is pretty much the center of pop culture these days. Trust me, I would know. The entirety of my channel is about analyzing stories from pop culture's most popular franchises. I think, honestly, of the hundreds of videos that I have made, I think my video on Interstellar is the one non-franchise related video I have made, and you could argue Christopher Nolan is a franchise in himself. The point is, I have dissected a lot of franchise movies and shows. Many of these are of course adaptations, reboots, legacy sequels, normal sequels, etc. I think I've noticed that fans of these franchises can forgive a bad story. Most of us acknowledge that storytellers can't be perfect, and the more stories they tell within franchises, the more likely they're gonna have some misses. I think a great example of this would be with Solo: A Star Wars Story. I don't think you'll find many people who say this is a great movie. More often than not, people will say either the movie is just fine or it's straight up bad. But you'll also not find many people who passionately hate this movie. You're not going to find people who say Solo disrespects Star Wars. They may not love the portrayal of young Han Solo, but again, no one is going to say this movie betrays Star Wars. On the other hand, you'll find a lot of people who say the Star Wars sequels, most specifically The Last Jedi, disrespect Star Wars. If you have followed my channel for a while now, you would know my thoughts on this movie, but that's irrelevant. I can see that most Star Wars fans think this movie is a betrayal of Star Wars, and that the depiction of Luke Skywalker in this movie disrespects the character George Lucas created. This is like the pinnacle example of what fans point to as a movie that disrespects its franchise. And we see fans have the same opinion about stories in plenty of other franchises as well. People think The Rings of Power is disrespectful to The Lord of the Rings. People think the ending of Game of Thrones is disrespectful to A Song of Ice and Fire. People think the Halo TV show is disrespectful to the Halo games. We see this everywhere, especially with comic book movies. Now we can point to movies like Fan4stick that disrespect the Fantastic Four, or Thor: Love and Thunder that disrespects Thor, or even Ant-Man 3 that may or may not disrespect Ant-Man. What I have noticed, however, is that fans are extra protective over what I would argue are the four most important superheroes: Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, and Wonder Woman. Now, when it comes to the 3 male heroes I just listed here, when those characters are disrespected, fans get really mad. Thankfully, I don't think we've ever had a disrespectful Spider-Man movie, but many would argue there are disrespectful Superman and Batman movies. This is the reason Zack Snyder got so much shit for his DC movies. Not because many thought they were bad, but because many think they are disrespectful. These characters that I mentioned simply just mean so much more to people, and I get it. That's how I feel about Luke Skywalker. Now, with all that being said, there is something different about Wonder Woman. That's because she is the singular most important and popular female superhero. This is not even debatable. Like, what other female superhero comes close to Wonder Woman? Black Widow? I don't think so. Now, Wonder Woman's importance is not just because she is the most popular, but also because she represents something that's far larger than her comic book origins. You would have had to have lived under a rock to not understand that Wonder Woman is a feminist icon. A simple Google search would also confirm this. So it's fair to say that any Wonder Woman story comes with extra baggage, simply because of how important this character is to modern culture. Now, this doesn't mean that every Wonder Woman story needs to be some feminist referendum. I think that's a limiting way to view the character. But it does mean that whoever tackles the character needs to at least somewhat respect what she represents. Just like how, for me, whenever Luke Skywalker is on screen, I expect some level of respect too. This leads us to Wonder Woman 2017. Of course, there had been plenty of depictions of Wonder Woman throughout history, but none of them have been even as remotely as mainstream as Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman 2017 is the first Wonder Woman movie to get the same level of respect and care as every other blockbuster superhero movie. Now, I can't emphasize enough how much I love this movie. It is one of my 4 or 5 favorite comic book movies. I think this movie is excellent. Sure, the ending of the movie isn't perfect, but still, as a whole, I love this movie. This movie did a great job at giving us a Diana Prince to care for and to root for. I may not be the most die-hard fan of the Wonder Woman comic book character, but if I was, I feel like I would be thrilled with this movie. This movie is not only great, but it honors and respects everything I think Wonder Woman stands for. But not only that, this movie also respects all the men in the movie. There was a quote from director Patty Jenkins that I can't find, but it was something like this: "I want Wonder Woman to not just be a hero to young girls, but to kids everywhere, including young boys." I love that approach to this movie and to the character. If in Wonder Woman 2017 every single man was a pervert or a creep or a misogynist, that would go a long way into alienating a significant portion of your viewers, because that's also not what Wonder Woman and feminism are supposed to represent. With Wonder Woman 2017, this movie portrays the men in the movie with the same amount of respect and care. Steve Trevor is an excellent character and a great counterpart to Wonder Woman. He supports Diana, he cares for Diana, and he never feels the need to demean or belittle her. Sure, at times he may doubt her, but that's because he doesn't understand the extent of her powers, not because she's a woman. The same could be said for the other guys that were in Steve's group. They also support and care for Diana. In a movie that takes place in the 1910s, that could have been very easy. Now, maybe the thing I appreciate the most about this movie is the love story. I hate this idea that when a superhero in a movie is in a relationship, that is somehow the opposite of strength or independence. Fun fact, you know what was the first MCU movie to not feature a lead love interest for the titular character? It was Captain Marvel. Do I believe it was a coincidence that the first woman-led MCU movie is also the first MCU movie to not feature a love interest? I don't think so. I hate the idea that a woman in a movie is somehow more empowering if she is not in love with a man. Not that every woman or man in a movie needs to have love, but they shouldn't be seen as better or worse because of it. With this all being said, I am so happy Diana's relationship with Steve is the core of Wonder Woman 2017. This movie makes it clear how capable Diana is on her own, but it also makes it clear that Steve makes Diana stronger and a better person. woman. In the end, after Steve dies, Diana is allowed to grieve without seeming like she is weak or too emotional. Again, I can't emphasize enough how important I think this part of the movie is. It's something I appreciate, and it goes a long way into making me love this movie. So Wonder Woman 2017 is not only a great movie, but most importantly, it respects the Wonder Woman character. Now I can finally talk about the movie this video is about, Wonder Woman 1984. Everything I praised the first Wonder Woman movie for doing is not only absent in this movie, but the exact opposite is highlighted. I cannot emphasize enough not only how bad this movie is, but how disrespectful this movie is. This movie is an embarrassment to the Wonder Woman character and everything she's supposed to represent. I find it so hard to believe that the same woman who made the first Wonder Woman movie also made this movie. Now, I understand movies are not made by a singular individual, especially in the studio system, but Patty Jenkins is the lead director, and the movie has credited Patty Jenkins, Jeff Johns, and Dave Callahan for the screenplay. So I think it's fair to say that all three of these people should be ashamed of how they treated Wonder Woman in a Wonder Woman movie. So let's dive deep into Wonder Woman 1984 and discuss specifically what is so offensive about this movie. But before continuing on with the rest of this video, only 18.8% of viewers are subscribed to the channel. So if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing for more content like this. Thank you. There are three main dynamics in this movie that I want to highlight. There's Diana's relationship with Steve, her relationship with Barbara, and her relationship with Maxwell Lord. Each one of these stories fails for many reasons, and each one disrespects the Wonder Woman character for many reasons. But let's begin by talking about what this movie is supposed to be about. The message is a bit confusing when it comes to all the characters, but the general point is that cheating is bad. When it comes to the wishing rock later in the movie, the storytellers are trying to argue that making a wish is considered cheating and that won't leave you fulfilled. That cheating will make you happy in the short term, but it will have consequences for you and for others in the future. Okay, fine. This could be interesting, but how is this theme explored through Diana's relationship with Steve? Well, the movie begins and we find out that 70 years have roughly passed since the first movie, and Diana has not gotten over Steve's death. Diana has no friends, she has no meaningful relationships, she just mourns the guy that she met 70 years ago for a few weeks. Now, as I spoke about just a few minutes ago, I am a big proponent of superheroes having a love interest. I think it makes these stories much more human and much more powerful. There is a fine line, however. Of course, you're allowed to mourn your significant other for your entire life, but there is something to be said about not moving on one iota 70 years later. Diana has not formed an identity for herself outside of a man for 70 years. I could forgive this decision if it took place 1 year after, or even 3 years after the first movie. But 70 years after? Diana has become a borderline recluse because of this. Sure, she has a job, but again, she has no meaningful relationships, and she purposely seems to avoid people. The thing is, I don't know if the movie is trying to argue if this is a good or bad thing, but regardless, I think this direction to take Diana is extra troubling once you consider that this is Wonder Woman. The feminist icon that I just spoke about has not been able to even remotely move on from a man for 70 years. I think this is baffling. The biggest criticism of how women are often depicted in film is that their entire identity often revolves around a man. This is why the Bechdel test was created. It is a very low bar to see how women are treated in a story. Wonder Woman 1984 reduced Diana to a woman whose entire identity surrounds a man she once loved 70 years ago. I don't need to be a hardcore feminist to find that disgusting, that they degraded Wonder Woman to this. I find this direction to be extra puzzling once you consider that earlier in 2020, the same year this movie was released, DC released Birds of Prey. Now, I don't love this movie, but the movie is about a woman forming an identity for herself outside of a man she once loved. How crazy is it that Harley Quinn was a better example for women in 2020 than Wonder Woman was? That's baffling. So having a Wonder Woman film where Wonder Woman's identity is so intertwined with a man is quite jarring. The first movie managed this perfectly. Steve and Diana were a perfect complement to each other and they made each other better, but not here in this movie. Steve is eventually resurrected. Now, maybe the most talked about part about this movie are, of course, the moral complications of Steve taking over another man's body. Steve and Diana have sex while Steve is possessing this other man's body, which means this other man is not able to consent. This is definitionally assault. Obviously, the writers and Patty Jenkins didn't intend on sending this message, but that doesn't matter. The writers unintentionally made a Wonder Woman movie where Wonder Woman sexually assaults a man. The movie about a really important feminist icon features that icon sexually assaulting a man. I'm at a loss for words. People in 2020 talked about this to death, but no one emphasized enough that this is Wonder Woman who's doing this. I could not think of a more disrespectful thing you could have Wonder Woman do. It is definitionally the biggest way to portray what Wonder Woman is about. There is nothing I could say throughout the rest of this video that will trump how bad this story beat is, and it only gets worse the more you think about it. I have a fun question. Do you remember what this man's name is? Well, you can't answer this question because this man doesn't have a name. Even in the credits, he's referred to as Handsome Man. So this movie doesn't even attempt to develop this man in any way. They're just reducing him to his looks. I don't mean to be that guy who just complains about how if the roles were reversed, people would freak out. I just think it's worth emphasizing repeatedly because this is a Wonder Woman movie. To continue on with this point, not only is Handsome Man sexually assaulted, not only do Steve and Diana not care, but they also have no consideration for this man's well-being at all. Diana brings Steve as Handsome Man all over the world where he is put in life-threatening situations, and Diana and Steve have no concern for this man's safety. That is honestly quite cruel. I find this decision to be even more baffling when you consider that Steve taking over this man's body doesn't add anything to the story. The only thing that I can think of is that the writers really wanted to have the scene where they reunite for the first time, where it plays into the dramatic reveal that Steve is back. That or the ending scene where Diana talks to Handsome Man. That's all I can think of. So the writers made such a disgusting narrative decision, and it had no consequence towards the character development or the plot. Now, here's a potential hot take. I think this body possession idea could have been really interesting. A point I'm going to touch on in a bit is that Diana has no flaws in this movie, at least none that the movie is trying to highlight. Sure, the consequences of Steve coming back is that Diana loses her powers, but there is no personal consequence. Diana doesn't become a worse person or anything because Steve is back. So what if this same situation plays out? Steve comes back through Handsome Man, and maybe Diana kisses Steve and embraces Steve, but once Diana realizes the situation, she really starts to struggle. She brought Steve back, but essentially at the expense of another man's life. And that's the consequence of the monkey's paw. Diana knows that this isn't right, but the man she has grieved for the past 70 years is now in front of her again. I don't think it makes her a bad person if she struggles with this. If anything, it makes her more human. How many of you would sacrifice the life of a random person in the world to bring back a loved one? It sounds wrong, and it is wrong, but I bet a lot of people would do this. Having this be the internal struggle for Diana is a lot more interesting than what we currently got, because what we currently got is that Diana wants to help the world, but she can't because she is losing her powers. I don't find that as interesting. I know I just said Diana has no flaws in this movie, but I don't think the writers see it that way. The writers are trying to argue that Diana bringing Steve back is a flaw, that wishing to have the love of your life back is somehow wrong. This is supposed to tie into the theme of cheating or whatever. I simply do not agree with this. The first movie showed that Steve makes Diana better in every way. These two are great for each other, and they had a healthy relationship. The movie arguing that a woman wishing for her significant other back, a relationship mind you that was perfectly healthy and supporting, is somehow wrong feels icky. Again, shocker, it makes matters worse considering this is a Wonder Woman movie. So I just disagree with the writers here. This sends the wrong message. This is not cheating life by any means. But if she were sacrificing some random man for Steve and she acknowledged that, then I would agree that's cheating life. But the movie doesn't highlight that. So those are the main points surrounding why Steve and Diana's relationship in this movie is so disrespectful and disgusting. There's a few other things I want to briefly highlight before I move on. This dynamic is not only damaging to Diana's character, but also to Steve's. Steve was such a rich and interesting character in the first movie, but here, Steve is not a character. He's a plot device. He does nothing besides follow Diana around like a dog. Also, the fish out of water stuff is a repeat of the first movie, but that movie actually had a purpose to it. When Diana is wandering around, not only is it funny, but it's to highlight the innocence of her character. That innocence of Diana's is a critical part of her character arc. So the fish out of water scenes are not only funny and cute, but also important. Here in 1984, it's just 80s nostalgia and funny lines. How is this important to Steve or Diana's arc? It's not. It's just a waste of time. So this movie does Steve no favors, which is a shame because I loved his character in the first movie. Now, the next dynamic we need to discuss is that of Diana and Barbara's. While nothing will ever be as bad as what Diana did with Steve, what happens with Barbara is pretty close. So the basis of Barbara's arc is that she is unhappy with her life and she is very jealous of Diana, so she wishes to be more like Diana. Eventually, she becomes more confident, more attractive, and more powerful. With Barbara, I'm not sure what to make of her arc. You see, in the beginning of the movie, Barbara has it quite rough. Basically, no one respects her, and a lot of men hit on her in a gross way, with one man straight up assaulting her. She wishes all this changes, and then it does. But as the movie progresses, she gets worse and worse, like more power hungry to the point where she becomes a cat. Is the message here that cheating will lead to your own downfall? But Barbara's problem wasn't cheating, it was her being unable to control her thirst for power. Is the movie trying to argue that she should have been happy with the way things were before? That she shouldn't try to change? Or was it just that her change was unnatural and therefore it's bad? Barbara gets harassed in this movie, something that is clearly wrong. How should she have reacted? Was she in the wrong to wish these people would stop harassing her? I don't know what the writers thought was the right decision for her to make. Every time Diana gets approached by a man, she nonchalantly ignores them. Is that what Barbara was supposed to do? Be more like Diana? Also, I don't think this is a healthy way to approach the situation. Diana has the luxury of ignoring these men because she knows they can never hurt her. She has superpowers. Someone in Barbara's position can't afford to think that way. She's a normal woman with normal experiences. She can't afford to act like Diana. She could get hurt. So again, I ask the writers, what was she supposed to do? Why is she in the wrong for wishing this wouldn't happen to her? Why is this considered cheating? Now, the part of this whole thing that I found to be so disgusting and disrespectful is the portrayal of every man that isn't Steve. Every man in this movie is a pig. And this isn't just with Barbara's story. Men are repeatedly hitting on Diana as well. And even at the mall, we see men just stare at women's asses. What does this message send? That every man's a pig? That all men are the same? Either power hungry like Maxwell or extremely perverted like everyone else? Why did the writers feel the need to go out of their way to show most of the men acting like this? I don't get it. This also goes against the message of the first movie, that humanity is great despite their flaws and that they deserve love. All of Steve's friends were great people, but I guess 1984 argues otherwise. Is this why this movie is set in the 80s? Because besides some campy vibes and a bit of nostalgia, the setting of the 80s doesn't really add anything to the movie. But I guess one could argue that harassment towards women was more acceptable back in the 80s? Would it have been too jarring if this movie was made in 2020, showing all men being pigs? Maybe. Now, maybe more importantly, what does this movie actually have to say about sexual harassment? Well, it's just used as a cheap trick to get us to feel bad for the women, as if harassment is the only thing a woman can ever struggle with. Obviously, this is a real struggle for a lot of women, but sometimes I find it lazy in stories, and it feels lazy here. This movie wants to be a movie with a powerful message, a movie that tackles real issues, but it doesn't actually take the time to explore these issues in a deeper way. Let's just show Barbara being harassed and that's it. This isn't related to Barbara, but the same could be said with the stuff that's going on in the Middle East. We have a ruler of a country that's trying to ethnically cleanse a group of people, and that's kind of glossed over. Again, this movie is using serious real-world issues in a cheap and lazy way. Barbara eventually fights back against these pigs. I think she even straight up kills one of them. How exactly am I supposed to feel? At this point in the story, Barbara is clearly a villain, and her killing this man is supposed to be the turning point. All movie these men are painted as the bad guys, which they kind of rightfully are, but now we're using them to highlight how evil Barbara has become. Sure, these men should be held accountable for the way they act, but do they deserve to die? It feels weird to use these men that are harassing women as the victims now. Do you get what I'm saying? When When your narrative goals are so confusing, and you mix that with serious real-world issues, you start to question what the movie is actually trying to say. Here, I am repeatedly lost. Should I feel bad for these men or not? The other thing I want to touch on here with Barbara is her direct relationship to Diana. They have lunch with each other earlier in the movie, a scene, mind you, that has atrocious dialogue. This lunch is kind of the only meaningful conversation the two have. Considering Barbara's whole story in this movie is that she wishes she could be more like Diana, it's quite strange that the writers don't put in the effort to develop the relationship between the two. They don't have a meaningful relationship. Barbara admires Diana for everything superficial about her. Diana eventually tries to save Barbara in the end, but her attempts ring hollow because she didn't really know Barbara. "You're a good person, Barbara, stop." Really? Is she a good person? Sure, she was the victim to a lot of harassment, but does that automatically make her a good person? I'm not saying she is not a good person. I'm saying the movie doesn't actually do the legwork to answer that question for me. So overall, my issues with the story surrounding Barbara is how lazy it is. In a movie about Wonder Woman, you can't be lazy about topics such as sexual harassment. And then to make matters worse, painting almost every man in the movie as a pig is a terrible way to get your message across. A message, mind you, that I'm not sure I even understand. The last dynamic we need to talk about is Diana and Maxwell Lord. There's not as much here to discuss, but it's worth talking about nonetheless. With Max, I would say there is nothing about his arc that is straight up offensive or disrespectful, but it's still not very effective. Maxwell Lord is a con man making false promises. Sound familiar? He wants to be a winner for his son, but that mentality prevents him from actually forming a strong relationship with his son. Even his story doesn't entirely connect with this idea of cheating. Sure, you could argue that Max is cheating by using the wishing stone to become more successful, but in his case, his problem is more greed than anything. This is the case with every character in the movie. Sure, they kind of cheated to varying degrees, but the real issue each one has is something completely different. So I don't think it emphasizes the theme at all. And then to make matters worse, Maxwell Lord is kind of an idiot. The way he's able to stop doing what he was doing was remembering that he has a son that's going to die. There's a world where you can do an arc where someone is getting carried away and they forget about the person they're supposed to be doing this all for. But that type of character arc is harder to buy when the main villain is regressing into destroying the world. So his arc doesn't really work. Oh no, I'm destroying the world. But wait, I forgot I have a son. He's going to die too. It's stupid. But what I want to really focus on is the ending where Diana talks to him and the rest of the world. Diana talks about truth and that the world is a beautiful place and that nothing needs to be changed. Diana is not in a position to lecture people about this. She tells us the world is a beautiful place, yet every man in the movie is a pig. Such a beautiful place! This has been talked about to death, so I don't want to dive into it too much. But you can't tell people to give up their wish when they are wishing their way out of extreme poverty, or a parent wishing their child no longer had cancer. Imagine Diana telling a grieving parent, "The truth is beautiful. Go back to the way things were." It's nonsense. I didn't like that at all, and it makes Diana look tone deaf. Either way, this movie was simply a disaster. It was a failure by every metric, but most importantly, it was a failure to those who love Wonder Woman. Let's take a look at the reception of this film and see how it has aged 5 years later. Wonder Woman 1984 scored a 57% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with an embarrassingly high 73% audience score. On IMDb, the movie scored a 5.3 out of 10. Wonder Woman 1984 grossed $169 million at the box office, but the movie came out during the height of the pandemic, so I wouldn't put too much stock into this. Even 5 years after the release of this movie, there seems to be no immediate future for the character. Gal Gadot did cameo in some DC movies that no one saw, but that's all the Wonder Woman we have gotten. And at the time of making this video, there is also no confirmed inclusion of Wonder Woman into James Gunn's DC universe. So what do you think about Wonder Woman 1984? Do you think it's as offensive and as bad as I think it is? Do you actually kind of like the movie? Let me know down below. Tune in next week where I'll be making my final video of the year, and I'll be doing a 10-year retrospective on The Force Awakens, so stay tuned for that. Thank you everyone so much for watching another one of my videos. Don't forget to tonight the Glod Squad, and I'll see you guys next time.